And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the original mothership at coalitionradio.us, where you'll find 7+ years worth of programming. Interviews from presidential candidates, civic leaders, thought leaders, folks active in a variety of aspects of the civil rights and civil liberties movements, ultimately creating a veritable buffet of reflections at various moments in time across the entire, political, if you will, history of that era. Tonight represents a very special show. Typically, we don't broadcast per se on Thursday evenings. We're going to be adding nights as we go through the next couple of months with regularly scheduled programming. But we had to, in a sense, frame a response to what happened yesterday. There are so many cliches. There are so many misdescriptions, underrepresentations of what it really meant to, however you want to frame it. And what I mean by that is within about an hour after the initial shock of what happened, including the death of an American citizen, the events of yesterday were already being spun and hijacked by political leaders of virtually every stripe. Equal opportunity spin, equal opportunity outrage porn, equal opportunity political chaos. The events of yesterday were horrific. That goes without saying. And again, a human life was lost. So in the coming 45 minutes or an hour, we're going to be joined by a number of people from the libertarian perspective. We're going to have a conversation. And we'll explore each of the individual issues and aspects of this. On one hand, there's obviously the human implications. Someone died. People, many of whom now claim by their fellow Trump supporters who have acted completely out of character, out of a range of frustrations. They invaded, if you will, what is purported to be at least the cradle of liberty. How many times yesterday did I hear people talk about the public's house? A number of those people have spent entire careers, almost lifetimes, perverting it to be anything but. I'd like to explore that tonight. I'd like to talk about political leaders and the type of loyalties that they generate. Very often, folks who are, let's just say sarcastic to the Trump movement talk about something they call Cult 45. And it's meant to be in the pejorative. It's not a compliment. And it refers to, by some accounts, a seemingly lemming-like obsession that Trump supporters will have for a leader who is, at best troubled. I worked in New York City during the height of what they call the Donald era, when Donald Trump became just more than a local millionaire, more than just a local guy, more than just an individual who had inherited a father's real estate business, and by his accounts largely, not many others, but by his accounts, by the time he was done, had turned himself into a successful billionaire. There are a lot of facts that dispute that. But we'll talk a little bit about that. What happens when an individual seemingly hijacks a nation? What happens when an individual who clearly does not understand that the nation's institutions are, well, supposed to be at some level larger than any one individual? What happens when the nation's institutions are out of control themselves and spawn other institutions and other creations, some of which are the true stuff of nightmare? And we apply to those newly created institutions the same type of reverence over the basic functionality that was supposed to be our federal government. And that's a libertarian question. So we have a few people joining us tonight. We're in a second now, we're going to bring the first guest up. He is John Phillips. He is a member of the Libertarian National Committee. He's a regional representative. That's important. And it reflects a body of work that he has created, a result of which has led him to be on a national committee, essentially a board of directors. Most important, though, is that John is someone who has become, particularly over the last couple of years, someone who can be described as one of the consciences of the libertarian movement, the libertarian philosophy. What I mean by that, and that's not a self-appointed role. That's not the type of thing that you just say, well, I'm going to become. No, that's a reflection of other people's reactions to you as a result of your leadership and your thoughtfulness and your willingness to engage in what I call the big ideas and the big questions. He's a candidate. We had him on, well, something called LPTV, a Libertarian Party television show that I'm privileged to host once a week for the Libertarian Party. He's one of our down ballot candidates, reflecting not just the need to lead or not just a desire to be a libertarian, but to embrace the candidacies that are so important to the migration upward of the libertarian movement. And he is running for the Decatur, Illinois City Council, and displayed a command of local issues the other night, which was pretty impressive. So if we can bring him up, John Phillips from the Libertarian National Committee. Are you out there, John?
I am. Can you hear me?
Can we hear John?
Uh-oh. Can we not hear John?
This is the joys of doing a show on the fly. That's what you call a pregnant pause. Later on in the show, Connor Jagodis is the Director of Communications at a national law firm. Connor's on. He's actually in waiting as well in the wings. He's an adjunct professor of business at Lehigh University. And tonight he joins us, if you will, in his own capacity as a concerned citizen and advocate for smaller government. I mentioned in the notes on Facebook, he is really representative of a new professionalism, if you will, in messaging and communications that, quite frankly, the Libertarian Party has been a little bit challenged on over the years. Not because of the lack of effort, but really adapting techniques to mass communication that can only serve our regained 50 state, if you will, access, and really use it as a platform so that folks can understand our philosophy. Joining us later in the show, Mark Rutherford. He's the owner and attorney at Thrasher, Bushman, and Vocal PC. He's a former vice chair of the Libertarian National Committee. His expertise ranges from business and litigation through to constitutional law. A leader in the Libertarian Party, his keen insight into issues of civil liberties places him square in the heart of the issues surrounding our current crisis. He's joined us on a handful of occasions to talk about, well, just a few short weeks ago, he joined us with a handful of business owners who were fighting shutdowns across the nation and provided us really an interesting insight into business law. So he'll be just joining us in a few minutes. Connor and John, do we have either of you up yet?
Hey, Pat, can you hear me okay? John, can you hear me at all?
So the question, as we wait for them to be brought up, is that I'm going to ask them is how they would define last night's events. Was it an insurrection?
Can you hear me now?
All right, I'm getting thumbs up for them. Anytime you guys want to jump in, if you once we get the connection, please feel free to go ahead. Hey, there we go. We hear someone. Is that you, John? Or is that Connor?
I think we've got a bad lag situation going on.
All right. So, John, and we have a little bit of an echo. We'll bring that down in a second. Connor, how about you? Well,
Can you hear me now, Pat?
I can hear you just fine, Connor Dragotis.
Awesome. Perfect.
So Connor, and John, when you're linked up, just jump right in. Connor, how would you describe last night's events yesterday? You know, the media is out there essentially trying to redevelop their own narrative on the fly. I don't know if I've seen this kind of chaos on a domestic event of a political nature like this in the times that I've been watching the media, political media, which is an awful long time. You know, they've always been very good at interpreting a natural disaster or an attack, say, for example, the 9/11. That's a much more visceral event. This is much more subtle and nuanced. So what is the term you would use for yesterday?
I think it was a crisis of morals and values. Mm-hmm. It was tremendously disappointing, not just to see the media coverage, but also to see where the blame was placed by everyone from pundits on Twitter to friends to even family members who are weighing in on this. What I found to be most concerning is the degree to which we can all be influenced by the narratives that are put out there in such an expert way. No matter what you want to believe about yesterday, you can easily find a source that's going to confirm your bias. And in a kind of time when there's so much going on and there's so much at stake, that's really concerning, because to me, it indicates that polarization is only going to get that much worse as we continue to see the world in our own way. And we are unlikely, increasingly, to see the world in the eyes of our neighbors, friends, and family who, in reality, I don't believe that we're all that different.
Where do you place the blame for that?
Probably across the board. To be honest, I think this is a problem that each of us has to tackle individually. We all have the choice about how we take in our news, how we take in our media, and how we interpret things. And one of my personal challenges today was actually taking some time, which is something I don't do enough, to see what those who I disagree with are saying. And it led to some really interesting conversations with especially one friend who was very, very upset that this event had unfolded, and he saw it as folks following Trumpism and following this, what he defined as a radical agenda to desecrate a temple of democracy. And it led to a really interesting conversation about why we're referring to something as silly as a state building as a temple in any form. What I took away, though, is that if we aren't having these conversations and we aren't proactively seeking out these alternate viewpoints, we're just going to continue to exist in our echo chambers. And that's going to be an incredibly dangerous place to be as violence continues to mount and people feel that they're being backed into a corner during the COVID age.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, you got perfect. Jump right in, John. What are your thoughts on Connor's statement?
Well, I mean, Connor brought up a lot of good points, and yesterday was a lot of things, and it really was, to me, was an example of the mounting level of frustration with so many people in our country that feel unrepresented by the government. You know, we see the same thing with the Black Lives Matter movement. People cringe when I compare the two, and they're really not very comparable in lots of ways. But they are symptoms of the same thing, which is people feel oppressed, people feel neglected by the government, people feel unrepresented, and they don't know how to fix it. That's, I think, the biggest issue is that they feel helpless in how to get their concerns addressed, because they get so much lip service from all these talking heads that do not that then turn around and actually don't do anything to solve their problems. If anything, make them worse. And so that frustration level, I think, is what came out yesterday, and has come out at, many times this year, exacerbated by the fact that we're all trapped at home in the COVID age.
Have there been so many lies by government for so long? People are constantly remarking, particularly on the talking heads, and I'll throw this out to both of you, that people don't believe in truth anymore. But, and I sort of arbitrarily, as a child of the 60s, if you will, point the beginning of the big lie to the Gulf of Tonkin. And move forward through the Iranian crisis, and so many people still don't understand the fundamental role of American foreign policy in creating the Iranian crisis of the 70s. Go through 9/11, the Gulf Wars, the Afghanistan War, the quote unquote good war. All of these narratives that have been handed to us by government. The war on drugs, the war on sex work, the war on fill in the blanks. Has government lied so often now that it's virtually impossible to understand or believe in any truth?
I think lie sometimes is overstating it, though they do that as well. Often it is selective truth. They tell you certain facts that support their narrative, but don't tell you all the facts. Mm-hmm. And which to many people is a lie. But if we're going to be cutting hairs, we'll cut them all the way down to the quick. And you see the politicians practice that, and practice it in their speeches and how they present information to us in order to get us worked up to convince us to vote for them because they're going to be better for us and they're going to screw the other guy. And they use those little tidbits of information. They used them with the war on drugs. They use them with the war on sex work. They use them to justify us going to war in other countries. They justify raising taxes, to every little thing to grab just a little bit more power to themselves and expand that government. And yes, there are probably some out and out lies there, but they've gotten really good. It's almost science fiction-y, fantasy novel-esque, where people always talk about elves having the ability to not be able to lie, but being able to spin the truth so deeply that it seems like it's the truth. And our politicians and our media has developed that same skill.
Connor, what do you think?
John brings up some really important points. Politicians are getting better at spinning these narratives. Media is getting better at spinning these narratives. But I really can't bring myself to lay the blame at either of their feet at this point, because the question for me is, why aren't we getting better at practicing rhetorical analysis and putting our foot down when we see these things unfolding? I say all of us look at this and we recognize on some level that we're being lied to, whether that's deliberately or just as a function of convenience. But every single protester, both in all of the protests that have happened over the past year and also what unfolded yesterday in DC, and all of us sitting at home, we all have an obligation to decide what's worth fighting for us. And it was disappointing to see people use the word tyranny to apply so narrowly that really what it came down to is just meaning my team lost. And that's something that needs to be combated. Why are we not putting the work in to challenge these wrongs when we see them? And of course, yes, I love that we're on, this show right now talking about this, but it is concerning that Americans in their homes, in their own minds, aren't having these same conversations. That needs to be fixed if this is going to get any better, because we cannot reasonably expect that the media or politicians are going to stop doing what they have found works really, really well.
Absolutely. And that's actually something I've talked about before. And, and I still talk about, and a lot of times, which we see consistently, is people do that. They will very narrowly, carefully examine what the other side is saying and find every way to tear it apart, but they won't do the same thing to their own side. And so then, we see it all the time. We see, and we make fun of it when we see the Democrats being totally anti-war when Republicans in office, but not being anti-war when they're in office, and back and forth. As that one example, and then I'm going to flip it back around a little bit and lay the blame a little bit on the Department of Education. And some of the things that the schools don't teach anymore. I do a lot of work with children in coaching football and other things, and I talk to them about their classes and how their classes are going. And I, of course, have two kids that just one's in college now and the other one's about to go into high school, and they don't teach critical thinking in schools anymore. At least not to the level that they did when I was in school. Now, of course, I also had the benefit of going to some very good schools when I was younger, but so maybe I was a little bit behind that curve of them not teaching that anymore. But their analysis skills are lacking, and I see it more and more every year. They get taught to memorize these rote facts and answer these multiple choice tests in order to get funding for their school, rather than being taught to think and to analyze.
So how is it that we came to a place, excuse me, where ostensibly millions of people, possibly tens of millions of people, actually believe, and at this point, I don't know what the truth is anymore. I really don't. But actually believe that this election was stolen from them. Have we taken the Wag the Dog movie and turned it into a reality show? How did this happen?
I love that movie, by the way.
Oh, it just it was awesome. It was supposed to be comic. I don't know if it's funny anymore. Connor, you're a media guy. This is the culmination, obviously, of a year and a half presidential campaign by the Trump administration and 3 years and 11 months of ruling. How did they create this alternative reality, if in fact it's an alternative reality?
Well, actually, I think John hit the nail on the head when he was talking about education. John, I don't know if it's going to be any positive message from me at all here, but it's something that I experienced in the college classroom as well, right? These problems, as I teach a business communications class to first-year students at a university, one of the biggest challenges in my class is digging into that rhetorical analysis, teaching them to critically examine so-called facts to figure out what exactly the real intention behind them is. I mean, Pat, directly to your question, though, what they've done is they've convinced us, and when I say us, I mean Americans as a whole, is that politics is just another Red Sox versus Yankees rivalry, right? And
right.
The bottom line is that sports teams probably can be followed blindly, right? I was born and raised in Southern Maine. I'm going to be a Red Sox guy, and I can follow that, and my life probably won't be all that different because I love the Red Sox. When it comes down to politics, though, we need to be thinking critically. We need to be thinking like CEOs, right? What departments are effective? What leaders are actually managing their departments in an effective way? Who needs to be fired? What departments need to be reformed or eliminated? By teaching us that this is a team sport and you should only listen to your manager. You should only be hanging out with people who are wearing your same colored hat, right? And I mean that literally in a MAGA sense, but also thinking about sports, right? Keep to your own. By building those echo chambers and building these systems that are self-reinforcing, I think it becomes very easy for the Trump administration and, quite frankly, the incoming Biden administration to do the exact same thing, which is just simply tell us anybody who's telling you something that we aren't telling you is crazy, and you should dismiss them out of hand. it becomes easier and easier the more that we buy into it. And we need to do something seriously and quickly to remind people that this isn't sports. These are real bombs. We're playing with live ammo here, and someone's going to get hurt more than they already have.
Famously, years ago, Jerry Seinfeld used to do a skit, and he called it "Rooting for Laundry." And he talked about Johnny Damon. And I can't remember, you have a certain age to be a Johnny Damon fan, but and I can't do justice to his voice, but it was, well, Johnny Damon. He played for the Red Sox. We love him. He goes and he gets traded to the New York Yankees. We hate him. You know why? You're rooting for Laundry. John, are we rooting for Laundry at this point?
Well, I don't know about Laundry, but I have a couple thoughts. The first is that I don't compare it to sports teams. I compare it to religion.
Okay.
The old parties have turned their party into a church and dogma. And then I always reference the movie Dogma, since we're talking about movies and Wag the Dog. And Chris Rock's famous scene where he's talking about how they ruined a good idea with Dogma. And that's what they've done. And then when we go back to how did they convince us that this election was stolen? We talked about lies a minute ago, and all of the best lies are built on a little bit of truth. And we have, for years and years, we have made jokes and about how crooked politicians are. And I live in Illinois, so all of Illinois makes jokes about how many dead people vote in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And so this belief was already there that these elections were not quite kosher. And so they just capitalized on that existing belief. And then, threw in the media and threw in a little bit of, oh, we've got this story here where they found these extra boxes of ballots. And people believe it because they're like, well, yeah, I we all know politics is crooked. And so they just built on that.
Would either of you anticipate, and this is one of the sort of subjects du jour going around right now, and I'll tell you my answer after I hear yours, but that Trump knew he was going to lose. He knew he was going to lose quite badly. And rather than actively campaign, worked almost exclusively to build a narrative so that no matter what happened, he got screwed. Is it that craven?
I'm not sure that he's not too narcissistic to believe that he could lose. Honestly, but it wouldn't surprise me, on the other hand, that he is con artist enough to play that game. I actually made a joke just 2 days ago about I would like to congratulate the Democratic Party for retaking the con artist championship back from the Republicans. And so it wouldn't surprise me if, I think that probably he thought that he couldn't lose, but I also think that people at his level are smart enough to have a backup plan.
And what a backup plan it was. Was this from your readings of the events? And I guess I'm almost asking this for your instinctive feel, because who knows what, again, that if there's a theme tonight is what is the truth and will we ever really know the truth? But the crowd yesterday, by all evidence, they appeared to have been psyched up, kind of a perverted locker room chat amongst tens of thousands of Trump fans. They began the march in a peaceful manner. Was this just crowd psychology? Was it the culmination of years of frustrations by people who feel like they've been politically marginalized, and that's a feeling they've been catered to by Donald Trump because he had to have a bogeyman in order to get these people as loyalists? What do you think happened in that crowd? Connor, what do you think?
I'll jump in there.
I guess I'll jump in. Go ahead, Connor.
He's going. Well, I just want to say, I guess, John, I loved what you were saying about the way that religion in many ways factors into this, both literally and also as a comparison. Because as we talk about the temples of democracy, the first thing that jumped into my mind was, what if it turned out that the Pope's election was rigged? In order for that to be questioned and to be brought out into the light, you'd really need to then all of a sudden start questioning the church and the infallible nature of a higher power. And in some ways right now, there's a lot of pressure from political elite to form people's minds to believe that this is in fact an infallible system, right? The God in this case is statism, and it's this belief that the government's going to be able to take care of everything. So in terms of what happened in that crowd, that's easily in my mind what happens when someone's fundamental faith gets shaken. People react like they're backed into a corner, and they're going to try to find a way out. In this case, the way out happened to be acting out in a way in DC that was neither appropriate nor safe, but the result was very much the same, that they tried to shake the temple a little bit just to see what fell out the other side.
And John, before you go, you go, John, I'm going to bring up Mark Rutherford. As I mentioned in the run-up to the show, he's an attorney and one of the partners at Thrasher, Bushman, and Vocal. He's a former vice chair of the National Libertarian Committee and has joined the show as a friend of the show on a number of occasions to lend sort of his legal expertise. So, Mark, are you out there?
I am. How are you, Pat?
Excellent, excellent. I know you know John Phillips. I don't know if you've ever met Connor Dragotis. I hope you do.
No, I don't believe I have.
I hope you do soon. But John, go ahead, and then Mark, after that, jump right into the conversation.
Sure.
So what I'm saying is that you see this a lot when big groups get together. There's always a little mob mentality, and when the people are worked up and they're frustrated, all it takes is one little spark to set them off and get them going. And despite all the claims of agent provocateurs and it was Antifa and they're trying to make them feel, no. You don't need that in a mob. You really don't. When you get a big group like that that's already angry, already frustrated, they're looking for an outlet for that. And you can give them a constructive one, or you can not give them one, and then they'll find one. And my read on the situation is that they were not given a constructive one by their glorious leader.
By their dear leader. Mark, we're talking about the mob mentality, the crowd mentality. I'm of the conviction, by the way, that, Donald Trump from day one, and remember, Donald Trump is a marketing guy, and brought together a marketing team, and it was almost like think of the American voting public as a focus group for Donald Trump. And they recognized this sort of frustration by people who felt they'd been left by the side of the road economically, that the rules had been changed on them and they had lost control. And he has cynically catered to that audience using their fears as sort of the carrot in order to maintain this unholy control over the government process. And that essentially got lit on fire, I think, with the recognition yesterday that dear leader, Le Grand Orange, the Cheeto, if you will, was about to be, as a philosopher named Snagglepuss once said, was about to exit stage left. Mark, you're an astute observer of political behavior. What do you think happened yesterday?
Well, and I've had some controversy with people I've talked to in the last day about this, but I've been saying this consistently since the lockdowns, since in Indiana you had essential and non-essential workers by the governor. Other states have had similar things that have been put together. And the problem, Pat, is that there's a large group of people who realize that they have nothing to lose. And that it's just not to the people who take it out in support of Trump or do like Trump, and it comes from any other group that's out there. There's a lot of people that are hurting, and they realize that they are in trouble. And very soon it's going to come crashing down. I'm very fortunate. I don't have money problems with my work. I'm in my 60s. I'm pretty secure. I think I'll be okay no matter what happens. If I'm 23 and I had a waiter's job, and I was making an okay amount of money and starting to save so I could do something nice, maybe go get more college, go to college, whatever it is that you're looking to do, go to trade school, go to culinary school, whatever. Now their money's all gone, and they're seeing it's going to end soon, and they're going to get evicted from their places. And so what do? You riot, you protest, you break things. You have nothing to lose to get attention. And so I see what happened yesterday as just a continuation of that. It's just different people in a different group who have the same frustrations. We've got a serious problem, in my opinion, in the United States because of this. We do in the world. We always have had this problem sort of in Europe, in my opinion, where the elites take advantage of the non-elites. And we're the non-elites, and by that I mean the people who aren't the lawyers, doctors, politicians, don't have resources, struggling day to day. They're being cast down upon, and so the riots are just a natural reaction. When the riots really started happening in Minneapolis, I turned to my wife and said, "See, I've told you this was going to happen," and I started saying that about 3 weeks after the lockdown started happening, that this is going to cause people to be upset because they realize that no one really cares about them in government and institutions. And so you riot, you have nothing to lose. At least you might be put in jail and get 3 squares a day.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because now, as you mentioned that, I had visions, if you will, of riots in Greece, student riots in Paris, student and racial riots in London. You talk about the Brixton riot, things like that, over time. And it had this eerie, distinct feel, not unlike the feel, and maybe this was a precursor to it, what happened in Kenosha, where you had this massive state building, and we were treated to the spectacle of people trying to climb a wall, people trying to get into a building to trash it. And if you've Mark and you and I, if you're of a certain age, these are the newsreels we saw in the 70s and the 80s, and the 90s, but it was someplace else. I think is that Connor? Is that the big shocker here? That all of a sudden, again, go back to the riots in Minneapolis, go back to Kenosha, move forward. We're not as dissimilar from all these other countries that we'd sort of cast a sarcastic glance at after all these years, are we?
Oh, we're human too, just like they are. And if you do, and if you study history, I like history, and I find it very helpful in learning how people react. This has happened in tons of empires, countries, etc. When you get to this position, you can have problems. We've had it before in the United States. We've gotten through it, but we're at another period where people who are, I call them non-elites, because there are people who are elites who are like, it shouldn't be a problem. You can be locked down for 3 months. You're going to get dividends, aren't you, from your investments? And most people out there don't have that. Or if they do, it's not enough to survive much on. They've got a great job at a restaurant, 40 hours a week. They make good tips, they make good money, and they're beginning to save money, and then bam, it's all taken away. And now the savings they do have are now gone, and they're looking at being evicted from their house or apartment.
I saw a great comment by somebody the other day that was talking about how the crisis really is the COVID reaction is protecting the elites while they make everybody else deliver things to them.
No, I agree with that, John. You nailed it.
Yeah, and that poses, I think, a really fundamental question, and a question not only to the general audience, if you will, but how we, and there's a commonality here, everyone on this panel represents at some level a step in or a position on the big L or the small L libertarian spectrum. Have we created a society, when you talk about elites, Mark, I often refer to government employees as the true 1% in this nation. Now, obviously, you have the billionaires and the investor class, but are there that many dissimilarities between our society now and well, let's use Greece, let's use Italy, let's use apparatchiks in Soviet workers' paradise. Let's use fonctionnaires, if you will, in during the great years of the French, if you will, colonial movement. You've got a sector of people, to your point, that are impervious to the kind of concerns that I think that everyone on this call has about, what's going to happen to my 401k, what's going to happen to, my employer, what's going to happen to if let's just say you're an attorney or if you're a consultant, what's going to happen to my corporate customer base. These people are protected from that. I mean, Connor, you're, and I tease you in this a little bit. You're a highly accomplished individual, but you're probably the youngest person on this panel. Your generation has kind of gotten screwed twice, if you will. You coming out of school, you faced the Great Recession. Now you guys have managed to work out of that, and it looks like we've screwed it up for you guys again. Does that resentment carry forward?
A lot of people in my generation, I'm certain, are facing incredible frustration right now, wondering how to rebuild for a second time. But I think that there's also a large number of folks who are sitting at home simply asking what the heck is going on. And I think it's so important, as I watched the news from the comfort of my desk yesterday, as I'm looking at this, I realized that as I see these news clips from other parts of the world, it's probably a lens worth looking at, where a large portion of these other countries where unrest happens, a lot of folks are probably sitting at home saying, look at this small group messing it up for the rest of us. That being said, yes, my generation has a lot to overcome right now, and I think they have a lot on their minds. The real question is going to be whether or not the policy and politics that we pursue as a generation is going to move to or away from liberty. And unfortunately, right now, it's looking like it's headed in the wrong direction. That is, away from liberty. There isn't a solid force at the national, federal level that is actually advocating for policies that are going to create long-term success. We've seen enormous financial problems from the Republican Party, continued war, and then on the left, there's obviously a plethora of issues having to do with long-term stability of this country. But when we talk about me working in marketing, what I see is this is one of the most effective marketing campaigns ever launched to convince people that liberty is not the path forward. They're trying to convince folks that there is a system, that there are people in charge, and we need to trust them. That's a terrible misinformation campaign, but it's something that all of us need to be aware of because, as you said, big L or small L, we really care about the well-being of our neighbors, our friends, and our family. And I think we can all agree, as most people do when it comes down to it, the more liberty we have, the better off we're all going to be.
And
they've actually done a really good job in that marketing campaign, where, for those of us who are a little older who grew up during the Cold War and watched all these things and they turned us and they said, okay, all these things are bad. We need to celebrate freedom. We need to celebrate freedom. And they taught us all that. And then they did a complete 180 and are now teaching us that those are the things that are the right things to do. And that, to the point now where we see people embracing, the government should limit the media and control the media and limit free speech, and all those things that we claim to be against for years. They've done such a successful job of marketing that they've actually turned a lot of our population a complete 180, and it's kind of scary, really.
And both of you, all of you,
can I ask John?
Yeah,
one question here, and not to play host for a second, but we're still so close to that time. It's not far enough away that there are great history books that can show us kind of what those steps are. But when you say they, and when you look at that process of change, that just in discussions with my own family members who are a bit older than me, who is the they, and what did they do so well? What lessons can we take away from them that we can use moving forward in the fight for liberty?
Okay, I had to think about what I said so I could think about which they you're speaking of, because I use they a lot and probably more than I should. When I'm talking about the marketing people, I'm talking about, of course, the politicians and how they used, different things to basically, in the 70s and 80s, it was all, the Cold War, and we've got to be anti-communist. And so they showed us all the things that the communists were doing and how they were oppressing their people. And so it was all about freedom. Well, and then the Berlin Wall fell, and they had to come up with another enemy. And so then they turned it to different things. And now they have just, they've slowly turned that around so that they can keep grabbing power. It's the politicians, the Democrats, and the Republicans both. But back then they were showing us movies and media and books and stories about how bad it was in these oppressive countries. Nowadays, we don't, when we see those oppressive countries in the movies, they still show that, but it's a different enemy. It's a different thing. And so now we don't get, it's not about the freedom anymore. And also about, there's been a whole lot of the ends justify the means discussion. And so we get told that, this is the price we pay for our freedom. To which my response is always, well, if we turn into what we're fighting against, we just lost, didn't we? That argument is a little deep for some people, I guess, because once again, we're not taught the critical thinking anymore. But that really is what it seems to me. I mean, is that every time they take one of our freedoms away, it's, we need to do that to protect you from this. And we need to do a better job, I think, of showing how that's not protecting us from that, and how maybe that what they're doing is actually worse than the protection. I'm not always sure how to do that, but they really have turned into very much the old school mafia protection racket. We're going to protect you from this great fear, and they turn around and extort all this money from us and all this, and take all this power away from us. Spike Cohen said that we need to take our power back, and he was 100% correct.
Mm-hmm.
So now, you gentlemen have done a far better job than I could of framing really the question for the evening. If we all put our big L or small L libertarian hats on, John, to your point, when you look at an issue like Section 230, which of course is often regarded as the First Amendment rights of the internet, that's clearly a subject that's become far too nuanced for people to understand, apparently, because if you're in tune with civil liberties and understand what rights and freedoms are all about, you understand how the removal of that is an existential threat to actually what we're literally doing right now. And if you look to the bigger issues, which is election laws and how election laws work, again, they've been completely perverted in the minds of individuals who are basing their beliefs. Their beliefs are solely outcome based. So the question then, the libertarian movement, the libertarian philosophy, we find ourselves on a practical level at a moment in history where the Republican Party is facing, I guess the word of the night, an existential threat. And so what do we do to use the vehicle of the libertarian movement to move back to the center stage, the fundamental question of liberty, which by definition means being in a position to put the Libertarian Party into play as America's second choice? Is that even possible at this moment? What are all your thoughts?
Oh, it's very possible, Pat. The issue that we always have is that the people who are first attracted to a movement tend to be the academics. They like to argue with each other because they aren't mad at each other. They just helps them get better. But that doesn't work well with most people for various reasons. Most people, in my opinion, are just more concerned about paying the mortgage, paying the rent. And So we've got to take it down a notch for getting liberty out there, getting the Libertarian Party or the Libertarian movement to people. We can't go into these big arguments. What we have to do is we have to say, I'll just be blunt about it. I see you haven't worked in 9 months. Your restaurant's closed, and it's actually going to be permanently closed. Did you know that the state employees haven't lost a paycheck yet? And that's how I think you have to start approaching it with people. And then when they get more involved, then they'll get more understanding about how it works and how it is. The first you have to do is you have to get them interested in you. And that's where it's very tough to do. It's just not libertarians who have that problem, anybody with any movements. The women's rights movements, everything that's happened over the years. That's the issue that you've got to do is how do you reach the people, the mass of people who finally go, I can't just worry about the mortgage. I just can't worry about the lease. I've got to do something about it.
He's absolutely correct. I like to talk about the fact that people have really developed immediate gratification. They're used to it, and they want simple answers. They want one pill to fix the sickness. They want one pill, one thing to fix everything. So they feel like when the Democrats and Republicans, they present their answers, that's how they present them. And they present them in a simple way that appeals to their emotions. And we're trying to argue nuance. Well, a lot of people, once again, don't want to sit there and argue nuance. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to take a long time in the conversation. They want a simple answer. They want it quick. They want it at a 10-second soundbite. We need to do a couple things. First of all, we need to work on appealing to emotion, not just logic. People are far more, if you start with logic, they're going to get bored pretty quickly, most people. If you start with emotion, you might be able to get them to listen to your logic some. And the other thing is, an old saying, keep it simple, stupid. We don't need to be going into these long, drawn out, detailed arguments about all the little different things that's wrong with how the Republicans and the Democrats do it, or to steal a term from Spike, Republicrats. We need to keep it simple and keep it how it's going to benefit them and solve the problems that they have, that their concerns are at. How are they going to pay that rent? How are they going to, how are they going to not be poor? How are their kids not going to be poor? Well, the simple answer for us is the government's what's keeping you from being able to cut hair or to open your own business. There's your simple answer. We're going to make it easier for you to do these things. We're going to give you back your money that's been taken from you and let you spend it how you see fit in ways that benefit you the best. But keep it simple instead of going, we get in our echo chambers and we argue with each other when we argue the little nuances of the NAP and the nuances of UBI versus welfare versus nothing. 90% of the 99% of the population probably doesn't care about any of that. They want to know, are we going to help them put food on their table? Are we going to help them keep a roof over their head? And are they going to be able to have nicer stuff in the future? That's kind of this, that's what they care about. And so keeping simple answers on how we're going to address those situations, I think is the solution.
Connor Jagodas, among other things, what's fascinating about your career is that you are absorbed, you are immersed in the spoken word, communication, imaging, at two vastly different extremes. On one hand, you work for a national law firm and you work in some relatively contentious areas, if you will, of civil liberties laws and areas like that. Simultaneously, you are working with the youth, although, as I like to say, you are working with at a pretty high level of young people at Lehigh University. What is there commonality, or do these vastly different audiences interpret political messages differently? And what will, in your opinion, resonate with them? at this moment of crisis and going forward?
It comes down to talking about parties specifically, right? Let's start with Big Al's. The Libertarian Party response yesterday was tone deaf. It was not winning hearts and minds. And in fact, it just eroded the base that should have been supporting the LP to begin with, while bringing people in this moment of incredible, God only knows what's happening. This is a moment to say, look at what the other two parties are doing. We're a reasonable alternative. That didn't happen. I obviously, as you mentioned, I work for a law firm that protects those who have been hurt by public sector union officials. And the law firm I work for does that for free, which is an amazing thing. But reaching out to the general public about contentious and complicated issues, keep it simple, stupid, was the perfect phrase. And I love that John said that, because that is an easy way to win hearts and minds. When we're talking about selling liberty, there are hundreds and thousands and hundreds of thousands of stories of the free market winning, of liberty winning, of freedom winning. Everything from getting great jobs to people who have built businesses, or just people who are living great lives and able to accomplish things when they don't have government in the way. Those are the stories that we need to be telling to really convince those out there who are maybe a little skeptical. Holy cow, this is a viable path forward. Let's explore liberty, because at the end of the day, whether they like to admit it or not, people are caring about the way that these things impact their lives. If they see a path forward for them, it's going to be more attractive. The other thing that I want to say here too is that's so important, because as it was brought up before, I don't recall who said it, is at some point people get more concerned with the mortgage, and they get so concerned about all of these day-to-day aspects of their life that need to be paid for, is that those who are involved in liberty should be actively working to get paid to work for liberty. There are many communities out there. I'm involved in one that all that we do is we help people who care about liberty find jobs in the liberty movement. So when it comes down to paying your mortgage or choosing your principles, those two things are already married, because you're working for liberty, and that is what pays the bills. Living them as two separate worlds is going to just further complicate the issue. And you're absolutely right. People are going to drop off and not pursue liberty if there's an easier path.
There's
just to step in there real quick. I just want to say you were absolutely right about the Libertarian Party response yesterday. Absolutely tone deaf. And I feel the need to point out that at least one LNC member, Aaron Adams, was screaming for exactly the response that you said we should have come up with. So you are not the only one thinking those things, and you were right on it.
There's one last area that I'd like to tackle tonight, and I'll put Attorney Rutherford a little bit on the spot with this, and then obviously I'd like to see your other opinions. Right now, we are in the midst of potentially, and usually this is referred somewhat euphemistically as a constitutional crisis, but it really isn't a constitutional crisis. It's a crisis of leadership. There are those political forces that have called for the 25th Amendment to be invoked. There are political forces, my United States congressman, who is somehow believes that we can achieve impeachment in 14 days or less. Then there is, of course, the thoroughly defensive nature in the chaos, if you will, that is the Republican Party. Attorney, if you could for a little bit, I mean, just weigh in on those options, and I just want to throw this out there as a backdrop. The message, never let a good crisis go to waste, has become almost cliche, incredibly enough, despite the offensive nature of it. And to many, it would appear, obviously, that certain people, including the Madam Speaker, has just simply been waiting for an opportunity to do this. This is the individual who, of course, chartered a 25th Amendment research panel just a few short months ago, I believe it was. Everything seems like an eternity now. Are these real alternatives? And from all of your perspectives, how much of this is political theater versus how much of this is a serious need to respond to someone who arguably still, at some level, has the controls to our nuclear suitcase, if you will?
Mm-hmm. Well, first comment I'm going to make, and some people may disagree, is that our Constitution is not a magic document. It's just a document that helps us to do things better. And I think in some regards it's working quite well right now, because it is pitting different political groups and interests and power bases against each other. That prevents something that's too radical that might happen. Doesn't always work, but it seems to be in some regards working right now. It's only 13 days. And to be blunt about the nuclear codes, he's had them for 4 years. If you really don't like him, you've been worried for 4 years. So what's the difference? Unless he's really totally going mentally insane. If you look at his history and you've studied him, like some people have, I know him very well from the business world, not him personally, but from his behavior. None of this is out of his behavior. I mean, if you're going to have a psychiatrist says, is he acting abnormally? They'll go, no, he's had these mad fits before. I mean, so that's kind of an issue there on the 25th Amendment. But you've got to get the vice president to agree, or vice president of a commission appointed by Congress to agree, or a majority of the cabinet members. And so it's a very messy process on purpose so that these things don't go quickly unless they need to go quickly. It didn't take very long to declare war against Japan after the Pearl Harbor bombings. That took very little time. But that's because everything was clear on how to proceed by the people who were in power at that time. This is not the case right now. The Republican Party is now split in half. There's just no two ways about it. So you've got them fighting each other. The Democrats, they got a beating this year. You look at how they did in the state level, they got a beating. And there's a lot of Democrats, especially a lot in Congress, who are upset about it. So they're split too. So everybody's split on this. And if it was like 3 or 4 months, 25th Amendment might happen. But in my opinion, the process is working. It is it's sausage making. I love that term because it does imply how the Constitution and other things like that were developed to pit different interest groups against each other so that rash action is unlikely to happen unless it's absolutely agreed by everybody. So that's a long way to say that I'm still pretty hopeful about what's going on. I would be very happy if Mr. Trump would step down now for many reasons, including it's over. He's losing all of his staff. He's losing his cabinet members. It's kind of sad. But if he wants to go until the very end, he can. But he's not going to have much of a power base. The question is, will he act out of character? And my argument is he's acting within character.
John O'Connor, jump in. What do you think?
I love what you said about the Constitution. I have said for a long time that it is not a magic document. It's a tool. Sometimes it's a tool we let get rusty through misuse, and sometimes we use it as a hammer when we should be using it as a pair of pliers. You take your tool analogy as you will, but that's all it is. And sometimes it's better suited than others. As far as invoking the 25th Amendment right now, I have mixed feelings on it. I honestly don't think we've got the time to get it done right. And I have some fears that if you do it, you will turn him into a martyr for all his followers. I have many friends that have fallen into the Trump camp, and every attack on him, they get, just like when you attack anybody else, they get, when you attack somebody, they get defensive. And it's something that I'm learning to not do. I'm still not great at it, but I'm getting better all the time, to not attack people, because then they automatically get defensive. And when they automatically get defensive, then they're not listening. And so if you do it, you're going to make a martyr out of him and do all that. The flip side of it is that I sometimes do want it. Matter of fact, I said to the LNC earlier today that I think that we should, if we're going to issue a statement supporting taking it, that basically the statement needs to be, hey, the two old parties are doing a very bad job and we're here to fix it. And unfortunately, they've been doing a very bad job for a long time. And that, and all the attempts to stop them from doing that have failed. And then I compared it, and I said we should compare it to Al Capone. They tried to get Al Capone, and they couldn't get it, and finally said, okay, we're going to take it on tax evasion. And well, we're kind of in that situation right now. Trump and Obama and Bush before them, in my mind, have all done things that we could have impeached them for and invoked 25th Amendment for in a variety of different ways. And we've never been able to force it through. I mean, even back as far as Clinton, in his impeachment, he arguably did something illegal at the time that could and should have resulted in his removal from office. At least if you go by the laws and the attitudes at the time. So people have seen that we haven't been able to get anybody. We haven't been able to do anything about these problems. It's so rare that you see a politician go to prison, except in Illinois, and that's only because it's still only a small percentage of them. That if we take that tack and we say, hey, that's what we're doing. We're taking the tax evasion route and busting him on what we can bust him on. It at least sends that message. I don't know if it's a good message or a bad message, but at some point, I think part of the problem is people feel like they have no recourse when these politicians do the wrong thing. And so showing them that they're, at least at some level, there is a recourse, might offset the martyr thing, might not offset the martyr thing. Flip a coin, take your chances.
Connor, what are your thoughts?
John, first of all, I got to say that I absolutely loved the way that you proposed for the LP to frame that. I hope that they take that advice and run with it. And Mark, I got to say, I really appreciate your positivity as well. It is important to keep an eye on some of the good things and some of the positive potentials. And my thought on this really looks toward the future of what would it mean if they were able to move forward with the 25th right now. And for me, I'd say it is a possibility because it lays a groundwork for future presidents to be removed because they don't follow the will of Congress or other powerful players. And I think that could be an important precedent to set, as you put it, Mark, for the elite to be able to say, we are simply done with you. Let's move on to our next option. I'm not a fan of Trump. I'm not a big Trump follower, but at the same time, I do recognize that in many ways he is a threat to the establishment as it is now. And being able to take out people who are a threat to the establishment is an important step and an important piece to keep in play moving forward, regardless of how this works out.
I'm going to create something on the fly here. I'm going to call it the lightning round. And first of all, I'd just like to thank all of you for joining me tonight. We will put this out, if you will. It's live right now, but we're also going to be sharing this around the fruited plain because the combined wisdom of the three of you tonight in discussing a variety of aspects of this crisis has been astonishing. But for my lightning round question, and because all of us in this are active politicians at some level, I'm not looking for dire predictions or dire imprecations, but let's just put this as the question with a quick response. What is the future of the Republican Party after the events, not only of this past week, but of the last few years? John, why don't you go first?
I see them splitting in two, and maybe becoming, and a large group of them maybe joining the Conservative Party. I eventually see them going the way of the Whigs as they did to the Whigs before them.
Excellent. Connor.
I also see a break in the Republican Party. I think the larger majority will go toward populism and become the so-called socialism light. It's those others who are true conservatives with a basis in liberty who are those that are going to establish the long-term success of this country and its founding principles. And those are the folks that the LP and all who care about liberty should be courting right now to make sure that those principles are preserved.
Excellent. Attorney Rutherford.
Alliances and bases are shifting all over the place. We're finally, and it's a little long overdue, having a major shift in alliances among our political parties. And when this happens, in my opinion, it's a good opportunity for the Libertarian Party. I am seeing it in the state that I live in. We're working hard. We didn't stop after the November election. It's great because we have such a great opportunity to take advantage of these shifting alliances. But what I see major splits in the Democrat Party, the Republican Party, Libertarian Party. We're a political party, so of course we're going to have our issues. But and to some of us have been around a long time. It's very nice for me to say we're way more cohesive than we've been in the past. We do have our arguments and disagreements, but I'm pretty bullish about the Libertarian Party taking advantage of it in certain states. The question is, can it do it nationally?
Gentlemen, John Phillips, Libertarian National Committee, regional representative, conscience, if you will, of the Libertarian Party. Connor DeGotis, communications expert, author, researcher, professor. And of course, Mark Rutherford, former vice chair of the Libertarian National Committee, attorney, constitutionalist, civil libertarian. I thank all three of you for joining us. All of you have been on the shows before. It was a thrill to have you all together, if you will, digitally. And again, I look forward to the time when all four of us can be in one room and just, well, keep going. Keep the fight, keep the conversation going. I salute all of your efforts. And again, thank you for joining us tonight. We are the Coalition, the loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the original mothership at coalitionradio.us, where there are 7 years of interviews, including one with some guy named Gary Johnson that we're going to dig out of the archives and replay soon. To all of you who are following this series of crisis, questions, issues, real, invented, or imagined, I salute you, because it is your involvement, your willingness to not just be led, but your willingness to lead yourself and to challenge, if you will, almost the cliched status quo, that is truly going to be the savior of the Republic. Thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful night. Join us tomorrow night with an hour with the candidates. It's an LPTV production. We'll be sharing it to the Coalition Talk Radio Network. Down ballot candidates from around the Libertarian Fruited Plain. Join us every week. In addition to state chairs and leaders within the movement, as we explore on a practical level the future of the Libertarian Party. Good night. Thank you.